Thanks, Manny. So hi everyone, good morning. My name is Salma Uribe. I am one of the training and development specialists here at ISAC. Today I will be presenting on increasing FAFSA completion as part of our Spring into Action webinars. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. Just know that the session will be recorded and it will be shared on our ISAC PD on demand webinars page. If you are having trouble connecting to or connecting audio through your computer, if you know of a colleague who's having trouble, you can use the call me option for audio. I encourage you all to use the Q&A feature. If you are on your computer, you can see it on your right lower hand side, which is a square with a little question mark. I have some of my colleagues here joining me today that can help with answering any questions that you may have. And then feel free to view our upcoming webinars list at our isac.org PD webinars page. Just know that continuing education and professional development hours will be available after the webinar. So if you don't know about ISAC already, we are a state agency that provides students and families with the information and assistance to help make education beyond high school accessible and affordable. Whether that's, you know, doing outreach events with like the ISAC Core, they do a lot of outreach events to help students and families, or whether that's us here at the training and development side, just offering these trainings to practitioners, right? Just to spread more knowledge and information on how to make post-secondary education accessible and affordable for students of Illinois. And we also administer certain scholarships and grants to students across the state of Illinois. We're known for like the MAP grant people, so that's one of the areas that ISAC administers or oversees. We also administer certain scholarships, like some certain teaching scholarships and others. And then here at the professional development side, we offer trainings just on navigating the financial aid process, but also resources and support options for students, for underrepresented students, as well as understanding student loan repayment and forgiveness programs. So looking at today's agenda, we will be looking at some data. We will be talking about what happens after the FAFSA is filed, verification and professional judgment, and any and resource options for you all. So I wanted to start off with looking at our national data from the National College Attainment Network, which is known as NCAN. They have their FAFSA tracker, which tracks FAFSA completion rates. And as of April 4th, we are sitting at a 54.5%, which is, we're sitting in third place. Now, this is, just keep in mind that the 54.5% is for FAFSA completion only, and CAN does not account for ALTAP application completion. So just know that this is for just FAFSA completion. If you do look at NCAN's website, they do have a lot of interesting data. If you are competitive like me and you like to see where the state is at, I was looking at some of the data and just know like just to see what other states might be doing, where other states are at, right? We're a pretty big state, so just know that 54.5% is it's a pretty good number considering the national average of completion is 40.5%. So we're doing pretty good as a state. We could do better as well. So just exploring any options and just working with, for example, with ISAC, which are ISAC rep, to host those FAFSA completion workshops. So when we focus on as a state, right? So as of April 10th, and this data is more newer, right? More fresher than the one from NCAN, but we're sitting at 58% for FAFSA completion and 6% for the non-participation form. 36% is for students that have completed neither, or that have not completed a non-participation form or a FAFSA. Keep in mind that this 58% is including that alternative application completion. So it's including FAFSA and ALTAP. But the number we need to focus on is on that green portion, right? Which is that 36%. Those are the students that we need to target, right? not just for to increase FAFSA completion and increase their percentage as a state, but also to see where these students are at, whether it's if they don't have, do they have an idea of what they're going to do after they graduate high school, right? Some students may have completed the wrong year. I know that was the case last year where a lot of students completed the wrong year for the FAFSA. But asking all these questions, right? So there's undocumented students that might not know that there are resources available for them in the state of Illinois, right? Such as the LTAP. So whether you might have a student that might not be eligible for the FAFSA, but could potentially be will meet the qualifications and the criteria for the LTAP. So just knowing that offering those resources and letting students know of their options so they can make a decision that benefits them. This is the financial aid application completion performance metrics. It's very long. This is, you can access this through our ISAC website. The link is on the presentation. So this one you can see what other schools are doing throughout the state. For this example, I have some Chicago schools, right? And you can see where they're all similar but different stages of FAFSA completion. Again, for this number, when I refer to as when I'm referring to FAFSA, I also am referring to LTAP application. Um, so for example, Northside College Prep is at a 90% completion, right? So similar to what we saw in that pie chart, where is that 10% of the students, right? What is it that they need assistance with? Do they know that there are these options for them that they could apply to to FAFSA, or they can apply to the LTAP if they're not eligible for the FAFSA? That they know their options to access post-secondary education, right? And be able to fund part of their educational costs. Um, and then for this, it's pretty cool too because you can filter it out. So you can refine your search by region, by county, by district, by school, city, number of students, the percent that completed the FAFSA. And you can also compare data, right? So if you can see what your district is doing. If you have a district, if you're in a district where one school has a higher completion rate, but you have a lower completion rate, maybe you're reaching out to that school to see what is it that they're doing, and partner up with them to potentially host a financial aid workshop, right? Or maybe that's if you're a school that has a higher percentage rate, but you see that one of your district schools has a lower percentage rate, maybe you reach out to them and you're letting them know what's working for you, right? So there's some schools that I've worked with where they're in the same district, and one school is hosting financial aid workshops during their advisory period, or they have their ISAC core member during their advisory period. So sometimes that's something that maybe you would like to share with the other school, so that could be a potential activity that they could be implementing in order to increase that FAFSA completion, but also assist students in knowing their resources and support options that they have. um, so looking at what happens after the FAFSA is filed, uh, for um, FAFSA access for contributors without a social security number. So the biggest takeaways this year is that contributors that don't have a social security number no longer have to validate their identity to use their studentaid.gov account to complete the online 25-26 FAFSA. So last year there was a lot of chaos, right, with that manual verification form where they had to fill that out and send those documents to FSA. FSA had to approve it and validate their identity so that the parent or contributor could fill out their portion of the application. That is no longer the case for this year, right? FSA announced that they will hold off on doing that in order for them to until they find an easier process for parents to be able to validate their identity. But for the purposes of the 25-26 FAFSA, they're able to access it right away as soon as they complete or as soon as they create their studentaid.gov account. Users with ITAN that don't have a social security number must manually enter their financial information. So what this means is the direct data exchange that works, that usually parents and well, students and parents or contributors check off in the beginning of the application to have that tax data imported into the application. For users that have an I-10 that don't have a social, that will not work for them, right? They'll still have to check it off, but just know that they do have to manually enter all that financial information because the direct data exchange won't work for them. Um, Again, FSA is trying to figure something out in order to make that process more seamless for them. The National College of Attainment Network, NCAN, did announce recently that the 26-27 FAFSA will likely no longer require contributors to provide a social security number. Now, this is very new, so there's additional details that are pending. But just know that that is a possibility for the 26-27 FAFSA. So when a student fills out their application, the application is processed, they will receive their FAFSA submission summary. So this document just contains information of the answers that the student provided on the application. It also does include their SAI, and the student will receive an email confirmation, will receive an email stating that their FAFSA submission summary is ready to review, or they can also access it on their studentaid.gov account if their FAFSA has been processed. Now, this is where sometimes students won't receive any emails, so maybe checking in with that student, making sure that they actually did submit the form, that it's not because some students tend to, from what I've seen last year, a lot of students forgot to sign the application, right? Or their contributor forgot to sign the application, so that application was never really actually submitted. So just making sure that if they aren't receiving that email, or if they don't see their FAFSA submission summary, right, that they're looking to see if they actually submitted their application. To access the FAFSA submission summary, the student will log into their student aid account and navigate to the My Activity page. Under the FAFSA status tracker, the FAFSA submission summary will appear. If the application has been processed, they will be able to pull it from there. If they have not, then again, that means that they have not submitted the application, therefore their FAFSA submission summary is not ready. Their FAFSA submission summary will contain 4 tabs of like the eligibility overview, the FAFSA form answers, the school information, and any next steps. There was a lot of confusion last year, right? This is not a financial aid award letter. This is just a FAFSA submission summary. This just contains the information the student reported on the FAFSA, and their SAI information, if they, the federal direct loans, federal work study, right? So it's not a financial aid offer. Um, it'll have, again, like I said, it'll have their FAFSA form answer. So whatever, it'll go into detail as to what they put into the FAFSA, their school information. So any schools that they reported on the FAFSA, for them to have their information, go over to those schools, and any next steps. For the SAI information, it'll contain some SAI information. They can click on what does this mean. It'll explain what the SAI means, which is just a number that is used by the school to determine the student's federal aid eligibility and build their financial aid offer from there. The SAI can change due to verification, or if they update or correct their FAFSA information. So it just gives them a little bit of information of what that means for purposes of their eligibility. Under the Next Steps tab, a student can view the actions that they may need to take, or what they need to look for, right? So if they need to make any corrections, it'll show them how they can make that correction from there, so they can review their FAFSA form and just respond, look at their responses carefully, making sure that all of the information that they provided was accurate. Um, Sometimes a student may have, misspelled their name, or their date of birth, or their email. So that's something that they can go back and correct. Sometimes they just forgot to provide that consent. So they can provide that, once the form has been processed, they can correct that form and they can provide that consent and approval for the direct data exchange. A student can select the drop-down menu to view more information, as in terms of like what is making sure that the schools have everything that the student needs, and looking at any other related communication. For the FAFSA status tracker, so Each student will have their FAFSA status tracker once they submit the FAFSA under my activity page. So it'll look something similar to this, where it'll show the FAFSA form started, then once the FAFSA form has been submitted, and once it's been processed. Again, this is where a lot of students got really confused last year, and even some of them this year, where they think that they've submitted the form, but they're missing they're probably missing like a contributor signature, right? Or they're missing that consent and approval. So this is where they can check if their form has actually been submitted or if it's still in progress. And then once it's been processed. Once it's been processed, if they do need to make a correction, then they can make that correction and it'll show up on here as well. So right now it's showing like the initial date where they submitted the application, when it's been processed, but if they make a correction, it'll show the date for when they made that correction and when that correction was processed. Um, and I mentioned some of the status trackers. So um, when the application is in the draft phase, it just means that the FAFSA form is not completed, right? So it's incomplete. Sometimes students select the form and then something happens and they log out and they don't finish it, right? So then it'll say that the FAFSA form is in draft form. When it's in progress, it means that the student provided their consent and approval, but maybe they're missing and signature to the section of the FAFSA form, but maybe they have not submitted it because maybe the contributor is missing their signature or approval, right? So this is where I mentioned like sometimes students stay in that in progress um, status because maybe they did submit everything they needed, but it's their contributor, right? So last year I worked with students where they would tell me like, yes, I submitted my form. I know I submitted it. We would check their form was submitted, but it turns out that their contributor hadn't submitted the form. So that's why they were still in progress. When it's in review, so once the student submits their form, the form will say it's in review, right? So it means the FAFSA was submitted and hasn't been processed yet. When there's an action required, it'll have a orange box, which basically just means that the student or contributor is missing the consent and approval, or they could be missing a signature, um, or the FAFSA form was processed, but a correction is required. When it's processed, then the application will say that it's been successfully processed with that green check mark, and no further action is needed. And then when it's closed, there will be like a little gray box where the FAFSA form was never submitted or can no longer be submitted because it's past the FAFSA deadline. For corrections, the student can correct their FAFSA by logging into their student aid account. Just know that if a dependent student if a dependent student, which is the majority of students that you are possibly working with, make any changes to their form about their parents, just know that they would need both signatures from that student, but also from their contributor. So once a student goes back and corrects their form, it'll kick out the parent's signature. So then they would have to get that parent's signatures again as well. If the student receives a FAFSA submission summary by mail, they can correct it, sign it, and mail it back to the address listed on there. For most of the student population, they are receiving their FAFSA submission summaries online, right? So they can, like I mentioned earlier, they'll receive a notification on their email that they can access their submission summary. So they can access that in their student account. They can view all the information, and if they need to make a correction, then they can select to make a correction, correct what needs to be corrected, and submit that to be processed. For verification and professional judgment, right? So if a student is selected for verification, for the 25-26, it'll be very similar to last year. So when using the direct data exchange, FSA announced that there are no changes for verification documents of what is considered acceptable documentation for 25-26 FAFSA. Similar to last year, FSA has indicated that they are reducing verification this year as well. And then contributors who have their tax information reported from the IRS are not required to have their information verified by by schools. Contributors who manually enter their tax information can request copies of their tax return transcripts to submit to schools. So if you are working with students where their contributors, their parent or contributors have an ITIN number, right, and they had to report all that information manually, maybe obtain copies of these tax transcripts so that the parents are ready in case they do get selected for verification. Because as we all know, if a student or contributor inputs their information manually, then they open that window to possibly getting selected for verification. Some examples of documents that might be requested from the student, right? So if they're trying to verify family size, then the student will need a signed statement that includes their name, age, and relationship to the student of each member of the household. Um, if it's an identity statement for educational purpose, then they would just need a signed statement certifying that federal student aid received will be used for educational purposes and a valid government photo ID. For income earned, they would they could ask for a tax return transcript, a tax account transcript if the tax return was amended, a signed copy of the tax return. For those non-tax filers, institutions could request a W-2 verification of non-filing, a signed statement certifying that individuals are not required to file, or the sources of amounts of income earned from work that are reported on the FAFSA. Now, this is up to each institution's discretion, so it's important that the student is communicating with the schools, right? And if they did get selected for verification, then what are the next steps? What documents do they need to submit? For professional judgment policies, there are two categories of professional judgment. So there's the special circumstance, which this is adjusting any data elements within the cost of attendance or in the FAFSA that can impact the SAI calculation. So special circumstances could be considered like a loss of income, or let's say at the time the student filed the FAFSA, the parents were together, but now they're divorced. They can submit a special circumstance. Or if it's an unusual circumstance, this will have to do more with adjusting the student's dependency status based on a unique situation. Schools can no longer maintain a policy of denying all professional judgment requests, so they do have to have a policy of those professional judgment requests, and they are required to have a list of adequate documentation that can be used for making that request. Most schools will have that on their website already with the list of adequate documentation that the student can submit in order to make the professional judgment request. So I touched a little bit on the difference, but for unusual circumstance, it'll apply to students of victim of human trafficking, legally granted refugee or asylum status, parental abandonment or estrangement, student or parental incarceration. Now, an unusual circumstance is not considered a, a, a student whose parent is not willing to provide any information just because they don't want to. They do have to have some sort of unusual circumstance, such as these four listed on here on the presentation. For special circumstances, it'll be loss of employment, or it could be loss of employment or financial assets, a reduction in income, any tuition expenses at an elementary or secondary school, unusual medical or dental expenses not covered by insurance, right? So if their income was maybe the same, but then they had a decrease in their income because they had a huge medical expense, right? So that's something that could be considered a special circumstance. Again, if the student is requesting professional judgment based on an unusual circumstance or a special circumstance, they just need to make sure that they are working with their institution in order to um, submit all that adequate documentation that the institution might be requesting. And there's provisionally independent student. This is for students that believe that they may qualify as independent student based on an unusual circumstance. They do have the option to submit the FAFSA without parent information. However, they will need to work with their school's financial aid office and they will make the final determination based on the documentation that was submitted. So the schools may require the student to submit any additional documentation to see if they can provide that dependency override. Again, it'll be up to the school's discretion. Just because the student selected provisionally independent and they're considered provisionally independent, it doesn't mean that they will be an independent student. That has to be verified by the school, verified and determined by the school. For determinations for unaccompanied and homeless youth, um, the list that of people who they can provide that who can provide that determination, right, is a homeless district liaison, the financial aid office from a different school for the same or prior award year, the director of a designee of a transitional or emergency shelter, a street outreach program, a homeless youth drop-in center, program serving individuals experiencing homelessness, program supported by Federal TRIO and Gear Up grant, right? So for homeless, it'll be for students that don't have housing. They're probably, if they are in a shelter, then they can get that district, or sorry, that determination letter from their director or designee of a transitional or emergency shelter. And unaccompanied just means that they are not currently in company or with of their parents for a specific reason. So just a reminder of some changes for the colleges, right? So colleges can accept documentation of independent student status from a financial aid administrator or a different institution. Um, so for example, if I am transferring from, let's just say, Harold Washington to UIC, and I was considered an independent student at Harold Washington, I can submit that documentation to UIC, right? But again, it'll vary by institution. So UIC will determine if that dependency status will carry over to UIC or not, right? So it'll be up to the school's discretion. However, the colleges, UIC can accept the documentation that was submitted for Harold Washington. For students who are deemed independent for financial aid purposes, they can be considered independent for subsequent award years only if the student attended the same institution. So they no longer have to submit documentation every year to meet that criteria. So similar to what I mentioned, let's just say I stay at UIC all 4 years, and my first year I submit all that documentation where I'm an independent student. The following year, I don't have to keep submitting that documentation to meet that criteria if I stay at UIC all 4 years. Um, So just going back a little bit to verification, uh, again, encourage students to gather documents as soon as possible and submitting them on time. On their FAFSA submission summary, one thing I completely missed, and I apologize. On their SAI, if they have the little asterisk or the little star, that means that they will be selected, they got selected for verification through the FAFSA processing system. So if students receive their FAFSA submission summary and they have that asterisk next to their student aid index number, then they know that they've been selected for verification. So just gathering all that documentation as soon as possible to submit on time to the institutions, and submitting only what is being requested. Because if you're gonna they requested a tax return transcript and you submit a tax return transcript, but then you also submit a W-2 and the numbers are a bit inconsistent, then you open the door to more inconsistencies, right? For them to find more inconsistencies, and the student will be stuck in the verification process for longer. Also letting them know that to keep copies of everything that they submit, and asking questions, right? So if they're confused or unaware of a certain document, asking questions to make sure that they get that clarification. So a few resources and support. We have the Financial Aid Application Completion Initiative, which is our FCI. High schools can track the FAFSA and alternative application opt-out waiver completion in the gift assistance program, which is GAP Access. They can export the roster to document compliance for the FAFSA graduation requirements. I know it's super hard to see because it's really small, but it'll contain the student's first name, last name, and initial date of birth. This is part of our demo website, but for purposes of just their students could be named could be named, potentially be named here on that list, or, so we just cover those up. Um, Again, so it'll have their, it's so small to see. Sorry, let me see if I can zoom in. Um, okay, so it'll have whether they filed a FAFSA, right? So no FAFSA filed, or if they filed and have an SAI, it'll come up in the Gap Access Program assistance portal. So this is where a lot of counselors will then start pulling students to see if they need they'll start pulling individual students to see if they need any assistance with completing the form. Then you have here the for the admin waiver, which is known as the good faith effort, um, or the paper waiver. So you have these boxes right here. So again, like I mentioned, the admin waiver, which is known as the good faith effort. This is where they will administrators can check off that box if they completed the non-participation form through ISAC's student portal. Then the box for the non-participation form will automatically be checked off. Um, some certain admin waiver details. So only account administrators can check the box. They can select multiple students at a time. As I mentioned, the admin waiver, I know last year was the good faith effort, but now it's transitioning to the admin waiver. So account administrators can check that box to indicate the school's attempt to assist the student. Now, last year you had to like go into detail in terms of what you did in order to contact that student. This year you're just certifying that you tried to contact the student, you sign it and you submit that. You no longer have to explain and go into detail as to what you did to contact that student. So connecting your students with ISAC, if the admin waiver is granted, you share this message with the students. So an administrative waiver for a high school graduation requirement has been granted and submitted on your behalf. If you are a high school senior and did not complete a FAFSA or LTAP, please provide your contact information by completing the brief form at isac.org/connect. You will receive additional information from the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. So this is where this this box will be checked off, right? So the consent to contact, that just means that ISAC can contact them in terms of letting them know deadlines for the LTAP or the FAFSA. So it's just granting that consent. For year-round help, I mentioned it earlier, working with your ISAC core members. If the student is not sure who their ISAC rep is, they can search it up on the student portal with their zip code. They'll be able to see who their ISAC rep is, but also their contact information. The ISAC core members can help students with any college or scholarship applications, but they can also host any sessions or workshops, such as a financial aid workshop, a college application workshop, or a financial aid offer or award letter workshop. Both of the ISAC core members are available, during school hours or outside of school hours to meet with families and answer their questions. Something new that we have here is the ISAC booking. So this is a great resource. It's very new. So this is where students will book a virtual one-on-one session with an ISAC core member to help complete the FAFSA, right? So if they do have a specific ISAC core member that they want to work with, they can choose that they can choose that ISAC core member on the list. Otherwise, they can just randomly be selected an ISAC rep. The great thing of this resource of ISAC bookings is that it's also available in Spanish. So if there are families who are only Spanish-speaking households, then they can use the ISAC bookings to meet with ISAC core member that speaks Spanish to help them with the FAFSA or the LTAP. This is the link for the ISAC bookings page, but also when the student goes to the student portal, it'll have the link here in this red box right here. Connecting with ISAC by providing their contact information on the page, students will be connected to ISAC's college Q&A, which is on my next slide. which is the text messaging service for high school students for all grade levels and college students and parents. So they can submit questions about any college or financial aid process that they may have to this number. It is available for English and it's also available for Spanish. So all the student needs to do is just input their name and information to and text any questions to those numbers, and they'll receive an answer pretty quickly. Um, Also, these messages are targeted based on the student's grade level. So, for example, for a high school senior, they will receive reminders about completing a financial aid application. There's also the ISAC student portal, which is a great resource for students to use. The account is completely free to make. And if the student wants to know more about certain ISAC grants or scholarships, then they can learn more through the student portal. But also, if they want to know more about college or financial aid or scholarship searches, they can also access those resources there. There's also the First Gen network, completely free to join as well. This helps students who are first generation navigate the college going process. They can get connected to a First Gen mentor, which is an ISAC core member that is specifically designated to be a first generation mentor because they're a first generation themselves. So they can help with finding a program or on campus for first generation students. They can join a check-in on events with other first generation students. These services, again, are free. It can be a very overwhelming process, right? Especially for first gen students to navigate that process because everything is so new to them. There's a lot of new terms. So just having a support and a resource like this can benefit students by giving them that opportunity to connect with others. For the FAFSA communication toolkit, this is a resource guide for practitioners to communicate with families for best practices regarding financial aid. They can utilize the guide's examples. There's a lot of email templates that can be sent to families. They're available in English and in Spanish, so that's pretty cool. There's also templates that can email to volunteers. So definitely I recommend checking that out if you want to find a more efficient process to connecting with families. For professional development from ISAC, you can visit our website for any latest trainings. You can also contact us directly if you do want to request a training such as the FAFSA line by line, for example. Just make sure that you are reaching out to us with the topic you are interested in, and we will do our best to try to accommodate those requests. Um, Similar to the ISAC College Q&A, this is very new, but it's our ISAC Connection. This is specifically for counselors and practitioners who have any questions regarding financial aid. Just feel free to text that number with the school you're affiliated with, and you'll receive a response within the hour. So again, this is meant for practitioners and counselors who may have any questions regarding the financial aid process, right? So maybe you're helping a student and you have a question and and you can text that number and we'll get back to you right away. You don't have to wait for an email response. So this is our QR code for feedback for CE and PD hours. You do have to complete the evaluation by Thursday, April 17th, by 4:30. Once you do access the SurveyMonkey link, just make sure that you do select the webinar for April 15th, which is increasing FAFSA completion. For continuing education credits or hours, the evaluation is required, and if you are requesting PD hours, then you should also include your EIN, which is your Illinois Educator Identification Number. To access the evaluation, Manny just put the link on the chat, but you can also scan the QR code. I'll leave it on for a few minutes, and then we will follow up with you with the completed forms via email within 1 to 2 weeks of this webinar. I'll come back to this slide, but again, I just wanted to offer our contact information. Feel free to sign up for ISAC e-messaging to receive any news and updates. Again, if you have any questions regarding just the webinar or any questions overall, feel free to contact us. And I'll go back to the SurveyMonkey link so that you all have another chance to scan it.